My project is all about persons with disabilities, their involvement or lack thereof in sport, and how that relates to their identities. I have recently found my passion for merging two of my interests, working as a future early childhood educator for the differently abled population in a setting that advocates for inclusion and accessibility within children's rights. I am personally involved in the Paralympic movement and have been an athlete competing in both London 2012 and Rio 2016 Paralympics, and I'm currently training for the Paralympic Games in Tokyo 2020. I truly believe that there is a place for everybody in sport, and my swimming is a huge part of my life. My hope is to create and share this story in a way that will get people inspired, listening, and involved. For the purpose of this project, I've reached out to and interviewed a total of 9 individuals who are all involved in parasport to some capacity, whether it be as a coach, mentor, or athlete. Each person has supported, helped, and stood alongside me in my sport journey to get me to the point of being able to call myself a high-performance level athlete. They are just as eager to raise awareness and create a positive change for the very real, very relevant, and unfortunate issue for today's disabled youth.
My name is Camille Birubé. I am a 2-time Paralympian in swimming. I have been representing Canada on the international stage since 2009. I recently graduated from the University of Ottawa with a degree in communications with a minor in feminist studies. And I've been really focusing on disability studies throughout my undergrad and representation of disability in the media. But I also focused a lot on disability at the intersection of gender and sexual orientation. So I really hope that what I'll be able to bring to this video will be useful to all of those who will watch it.
My name is Carla Shipley. I'm 28 and I have vision loss, so I'm legally blind. I was diagnosed at 10 years old and I'm, like I said, 28 now. I'm from paracycling. I've played a lot of sports, but this is my 5th year competing in paracycling. Before paracycling, I competed in goalball. That's a sport for people that are partially sighted and blind, so it's a Paralympic sport as well. And then growing up, I played like anything and everything, like able-bodied sports. I wrestled in high school. I tried gymnastics. That wasn't probably the greatest thing. Yeah, after I finished wrestling, then that's when I got into parasports, and that was when I was, I would say, 20.
My name is David Legg. I'm the chair of the Department of Health and Physical Education at Mount Royal University, and I'm the past president of the Canadian Paralympic Committee.
Hi, my name is Courtney Hefner, and this is my daughter, Keziah Hefner. Keziah is 11 years old and was diagnosed with cerebral palsy when she was 11 months. And she has hemiplegia, which affects one side of her body. And yeah.
Hi, my name is Christina Crook, and I have been a swim coach for 27 years. And I have had the opportunity to work with a number of athletes with disabilities or able-bodied athletes.
Hi, I'm Michael Sammons. I'm a competitive cyclist on the paracycling national team.
I'm Shane Esau, and I'm a research coordinator in the Sport Injury Prevention Research Center at the University of Calgary and the By-Right Rehab Research Program at Alberta Children's Hospital.
My name is Tessa Gallinger. I am a strength and conditioning coach working with Paralympic Swimming Canada, cycling, goalball, and multiple other sports.
Hi, I'm Zach Zona. I'm a competitive swimmer. I've been on the Canadian National Para Swim team since 2014.
I have asked a total of 3 questions to capture the historical, cultural, and professional influences. In order to capture the professional influences, I asked them to talk about their experience getting into a sport as a young child or working with youth in sport. Were there any motivations or any adversities or obstacles?
So I think there's different organizations and more programs available, but those programs are not as well known as the programs that are designed for folks who do not have an impairment. So this becomes a barrier, obviously. And I think if you look at the coaching level, for example, often when you are, a young coach starting off, you're teaching young kids and whatnot. There's no professional development. There is no coaching around how to adapt a workout or how to adapt an environment so that someone with different abilities could be able to participate in such activity. So I think that everyone is kind of like stumbling in the dark a little bit and trying to figure out how can we make, an environment where it can be as inclusive as possible. But what we're trying to do is not create Paralympic champions. As soon as you have an impairment doesn't mean that you should become a Paralympian or that is what you should want. Nor does it mean that if you are a kid who just starts swimming and you're able-bodied, that it means that you will go to the Olympics. So I think it's important to understand that nuance and that we're just talking about getting kids involved in sport because sport is such an amazing experience and you get to learn skills that you will carry for your whole life. Stay open-minded and open-hearted, really, to give opportunities for everybody to experience sport because it is such an empowering experience.
That's why I guess in some respects I've pursued a career in adaptive physical activity, and I encourage my students to do so because I see it as such an important need, but I also see it as a significant challenge, and one that it's not insurmountable. It's not something that's impossible to address. I think it's just one that requires diligence and commitment and time and energy and all these things, and so that's why I think I see it as something that can be fixed. I think the benefits and the opportunities for children with disabilities are not as plentiful as the able-bodied population, and that I think that's one of my concerns. Is even in the Calgary marketplace, we run a program at Mount Royal called CAPA, Children's Adaptive Physical Activity, and it runs on Saturday afternoons, an hour in the gym, an hour in the pool, and we match up children with disabilities one-on-one with our own students in our adaptive physical activity class, and it fills up in 24 hours. Now, we don't charge a great deal of money, but there's definitely a need, and then we have a huge waiting list, and if we could offer more, we would, but we just don't have the capacity to do so. But so I think there's an entrepreneurial opportunities, something that I would refer to as handy capitalism. I think it's an opportunity that perhaps has not been tapped yet, and that's offering programs for people with disabilities to participate in sport and recreation. Just even here at Mount Royal, one of our aquatic leaders created a learn to swim program for children with disabilities that he called H2 Able, and he started that based on us having our CAPA program and half of it being in the pool, and having parents then approach him as the aquatics manager and saying, hey, my son or daughter has just spent an hour in the pool working with this student, but I'd now like them to learn how to actually swim and to use proper strokes and those sort of things. And he just recognized that the regular swimming system wasn't providing that opportunity, and so he just created this H2 Able, and it's completely taken off, and we have all kinds of children with disabilities coming here for swimming lessons now and paying money to do so. So it's not like it's a charity. Again, I think there are economic benefits and opportunities to providing opportunities for the population of those who have disabilities, which depending on which statistics you use could be 10 to 15% of the total population.
I actually feel like our school sports programs are supposed to be introducing kids to sports so that they can choose what kind of sports that they like and get an idea of them, but they're not necessarily fit for kids like Keziah because the teachers aren't equipped to adapt and change the programming for the kids. And so I think that we're at a huge disadvantage right now still in our society in full inclusion in gym class, and how that relates to her knowing what her understanding of sport is.
one year I was coaching, my first year coaching with Cascade, there was an athlete there that had came to practice that had radial aplasia. He was just born with no forearms. And so I had to teach him how to swim freestyle with very limited arm space. And I didn't really teach him any different skills than I would teach anybody else. I had to make sure that his stroke looked and legal and was legal. And so it just had to adapt to his abilities. And then from there, he went on to breaking Canadian records and making it to the Olympic trials in 2008 for Beijing. He just missed the cut, but he went from being just an everyday athlete, coming and going provincial level swimmer, to being a nationally ranked swimmer within 2 years. So you just have to give everybody the same opportunity to grow and the same opportunity to learn. I think as a coach, initially, I was a little hesitant just because I was not sure how I could impact a young athlete with a disability, if I was going to make a difference, if it was going to be overwhelming to them. The one thing I did learn was that these athletes are not fragile. These people are strong, and they are more willing to do the hard work. I think at a young age, a lot of young athletes or a lot of young kids that are born with disabilities, unfortunately, have to go through a lot of rehabilitation, occupational therapy, physiotherapy. They have to go through surgeries, maybe multiple surgeries before they grow to maturity. And so they learn at a really young age to deal with adversity and to deal with, living their day-to-day life with challenges, and that they can overcome them. I feel like when I'm training athletes with a disability, the first thing I notice is their willingness to try anything, their sort of gung-ho approach, and they are just excited that someone's sort of looking at them differently and looking at them as the same as everybody else, and they're just given that opportunity to thrive.
For my doctors at the children's, they would always just encourage being in sports, because essentially it's a way to do physio for kids with disabilities without having to do like that structured programs and whatnot that physiotherapists would provide you.
It was a passion of mine to teach kids skills and abilities that I had or wanted them to progress in a career of swimming at the time. We ran a summer camp last summer for 24 kids with physical disabilities, and a lot of them were very hesitant to join. Once they were there, and by Wednesday, Thursday, they were all out trying things, and if they made a mistake, they learned with the group that we were in that they were just like any other kid, that they're going to make mistakes, and it's not going to be, no one's going to tease them. If we laugh because because it was funny, and they can laugh with us. It's not that we're laughing at them because they have a physical disability and can't do something. We wanted them to try, and a lot of us tried it, like wheelchair basketball. Some of us were good, some of us were not, but everybody tried it, and everybody did it. And so they learned how to move themselves better and to accept that sometimes they can do things and sometimes they can't, but they need to try. But it was a great environment because it was very accepting of abilities and disabilities. It was and always has been a passion of mine to work with people with disabilities, but I realized that for me it was phenomenal because I always had to think outside the box. I couldn't take what I was taught and just take it across to swimmers, because now we had to take into account a variety of different things, such as an amputation, such as cerebral palsy, such as spinal cord injury, that change the physiology of a person. And so you had to make sure that you were always thinking outside the box in how you were approaching things.
And learned a lot more about a lot of their kind of boundaries and issues in being able to make it to sessions, being independent, doing things on their own. But I also learned that they are able to be more independent if I help them with those skills. So that was one of my first experiences. And my second experience had more, but my second experience was with a young guy with cerebral palsy who wanted to learn how to ride a bike, and basically joined an able-bodied group, because that's usually what para athletes or individuals with disability have to do. And when he was working with his group of athletes with a strength coach, I think the strength coach was intimidated by the fact that the athlete had a disability. So they actually brought me in to adapt his program and help him fit into the training group. But not a lot of athletes have that, or a lot of individuals with disability don't really have that opportunity. There's not a lot of education out there for the coaches that are part of it to get kids involved, and there's a long way to go.
In order to capture the historical influences, I asked them their perception of disabled children and youth's involvement in sport in today's society. So were there any messages, the amount, or any issues, and how has that evolved?
So I think that more and more there's this really strong narrative around the importance of living a healthy, active lifestyle, which whether you're young or older, it's important to be in sport. You should be doing however how many hours of physical activity every week or every day. And I think we're getting there more and more with kids and their involvement in sport. But those encouragement and this narrative around the importance of living a healthy and active lifestyle still is very ableist, unfortunately. And the notion of physical activity can become challenging for folks who have different abilities.
So the first official games were in 1960 in Rome. At that point in time, there were, I think, 23 countries, 400 athletes, whereas today it's the second largest multi-sporting event in the world after the Olympic Games. If Calgary had bid for and won the right to host the 2026 Olympic and Paralympic Games, the Paralympic Games would be bigger than the '88 Olympic Games. So the size and the breadth and the sophistication of it is completely different. I think the other important point, I think, to know is that it's completely changed insofar as disability. And so in 1960, it was only athletes with mobility disabilities that use wheelchairs that competed. So it was the paraplegic games then, and it was, again, people with spinal cord injuries and polio essentially. And then towards the middle of the 70s and in the early 80s, other disability groups were added to the schedule. So now it includes athletes with cerebral palsy, visual impairments, amputations. I shouldn't say just spinal cord injury. Some athletes with amputations also competed early in the 1960s, but they used wheelchairs as a result of their amputation. There's now even inclusion of some athletes with an intellectual disability. So the understanding of disability within a sport context has completely evolved. And because of that, the participation of children has increased as well, because typically those with spinal cord injuries acquire them in the early to mid-20s. And so it was primarily athletes in their late 20s, early 30s that were participating in the Paralympic Games, whereas today you're seeing athletes much younger in their teenage years because they have congenital disabilities that are acquired from birth, as opposed to those that are acquired in their mid to late 20s. So that's the demographics of those participating in Paralympic Games has also changed.
I feel like today's society has gotten better. Lots of more recreation programs are available for kids nowadays.
I feel like it's getting better, but I think personally, for me, I'm not seeing more necessarily getting involved. I would like to see more athletes with disabilities or of all abilities getting involved in sport.
I think with especially Vancouver 2010, people in our society have started to accept children with disabilities taking part in sport. and I know I'm involved in a few programs that sport and recreation are paramount to these programs, and more kids want, more and more programs are being developed to enhance sport and recreation for children with disabilities. But I see the biggest problem that there aren't the number of children with like abilities participating in the different recreational activities.
I think it's better. That, or I've just become more immersed in the, I don't want to say the culture, but I've been more immersed in that world, so I'm more aware of more opportunities. I wasn't aware of them before I was immersed in everything, but I think the city and there's groups within the city have tried at least to create adaptive sport opportunities for kids that are like in magazines. I think they developed an app, for parents with children with disabilities to be able to use. That said, I don't think that those things are updated as often as they should be. But I definitely think that's a little bit better. They've also created, I guess, like a version of the RBC training ground for para-athletes. So obviously, if you have a disability, you can go to this training event or this testing event, and they'll hopefully help you find a sport that is suitable.
I definitely think with the growth of the Paralympic movement, there's been a lot more involvement with like disabled children, like getting into sports or even just being more physically active in general.
In order to capture the cultural influences, I asked if there was a connection between involvement in sport and a sense of identity for persons with disabilities.
I tried a whole bunch of other sports as well, like cycling and, like I mentioned, cross-country skiing and gymnastics. And I really found freedom in swimming. And this is going to sound very cliche, but it always felt like I didn't feel my impairment when I was in the water. I felt free. I didn't need to have it in my wheelchair. I didn't need to have my orthotics or crutches and whatnot. So right from the start, I really found that sense of freedom in the sport of swimming. And so that was really a strong motivation. Hard at times because I often found myself in a group of able-bodied folks only, which becomes obviously challenging at times, especially when you're dealing with coaches or staff who have no experience in teaching or coaching a young child with an impairment. So I would say those were the strongest challenges. But I think that as a kid, you adapt very well. You learn how to ask for help, and you learn how to understand how your body navigates its environment. So I learned that quite early because I was put in those situations. Really integrating youth and children with disabilities into able-bodied groups really is just what makes sense. To me, that's how we live in our daily, in our daily lives. We experience diversity on a daily basis, and to segregate people and create this group for, like, I understand that there's a need sometimes to create separate groups, for example, like a wheelchair basketball team and whatnot. But in terms of individual sports or at a really young age, it's still doable to include everybody. But I think it's fair to say that no matter what you decide to do in life, whether it be arts or sport, or you're more of like a school kind of person, or like to knit or whatever, we all find our sense of identity through what we do. So I can't answer for every person with a disability who does sport, but I know that sport has given me a sense of identity. For better and for worse, it has shaped me into the person that I am today. and it is a big part of who I am. But it is not the only thing that I am, and I am not what I do. I am a woman with an impairment who is also part of the LGBTQ community, and growing up, trying to figure out who I was in the sport environment, which is an environment that unfortunately can be very toxic for many reasons, and sport is not always a safe space. We are trying really hard to make it safer for everybody, and to minimize discrimination based on gender or sexual orientation. Disability really never comes alone. There's always another aspect of one's identity that will impact their access to sport in a way, whether it be their social class or their gender identity, their sexual identity, religion, race, name it, anything really.
I think it was my own obstacle because I wasn't really keen on competing in parasports. Like I think I just was like timid. I didn't want to see myself being different. So when I was 20, my sister was like, "You're going to a goalball practice and you have no say in it." So my sister really pushed me to like get into it. And then I think the adversity of it is that it's not really out there. Like, you don't really know that you can get like into parasports, and I never even knew that like paracycling was a thing till I was 24. I was like, whoa, you can do that? You can ride a tandem? Like, I didn't even know they existed. And I just think, yeah, like the motivation of if my sister didn't motivate me, I would have never done it. I think like one of the biggest issues is that a lot of kids with disabilities aren't participating in parasports just because, you know, they think they can't do it. And, you know, maybe it could be their parents holding them back, they hold themselves back. And then I think some of the issues, like I said earlier, is that people don't know that they exist, right? And then when they do hear, like, a comment I always hear, like, "Oh, you can do that? Wow, that's so cool." Like, and I look at them and I'm like, it's just an extended bike. It's what I eat, breathe, and sleep every day. Like, I wake up and it's like, oh, what am I going to do to be a stronger cyclist? And I think at the same time, it's therapy, right? Like, it helps me deal with what I'm going through that most people, you know, don't really understand. And so I think if I had parasports at a younger age, I wouldn't have been angry as long as I was. I didn't accept my vision until I was 24, I think. So I think if I, you know, had that safe place and, you know, wasn't always trying to, like, when I was playing able-bodied sports, worrying like, oh, what if I smash my face in, or what if I do this? Like, at least if I had that adaptive part, then I would have had that safe spot and, you know, had that area to go let everything out versus, you know, always just kind of swallowing it and not being able to let it out. So I think the purpose is having a safe zone and being able to play sports and just have fun and be a kid and not feel like you're different.
Number one, I would suggest that the importance and the benefits of sport and physical activity for children with disabilities is greater than children who are able-bodied. I think the benefits that participation can provide are significant. And that doesn't mean that the benefits for able-bodied people are not significant, but I would argue that they are, in fact, even greater and more pronounced for children with disabilities. I would say the benefits are greater if they can participate, but I would say that the entry to participate and then to continue participation are more difficult. And so I think there's a couple of things. Number one, you know, people who don't fully understand or appreciate parasport or sport for people with disabilities may not fully appreciate how difficult it can be, and they might just think it's a nice thing that they do, and so the connection that a person with a disability has with sport can perhaps perpetuate a sense of pity and a sense of, I don't know, paternalism, where, oh, isn't it nice that you swim, Morgan? Oh, that's just lovely. Good for you. Without, I think, fully appreciating that you're training to be a competitive swimmer. I think, though, that sport does provide an opportunity for people with disabilities to showcase their abilities on a very demonstratable fashion. I think, too, it provides an avenue for inclusion within broader society. So as a person with a disability competing in sport, even if it's a non-inclusive club, there's still that camaraderie and that community of sport. Well, I think sport for anybody, and when I say sport, I'm not necessarily meaning, elite high performance activity and competition, which is perhaps what most people align themselves with. And I would say that has both strengths and weaknesses and benefits and cons. But I would say physical activity and participation in sport per se at a young level is good for a number of reasons. It's an opportunity to learn about competition, but in a relatively safe and kind of genial way. It's an opportunity to interact with lots of different people from your communities. It's an opportunity for parents to connect with their peer group through their children and to develop a sense of community. I think, too, that sport does provide opportunities for people to push themselves and learn about working hard and learn about practicing something and training for something to perform, but in a relatively enjoyable, although again, there's always exceptions. There's nothing that's all or nothing. But I think it teaches you how to work hard, how to push through pain, perhaps, to push through disappointment and to learn to deal with it. And really, it's not the end of the world if your Little League baseball team loses the championship game in your local community, but it allows people an opportunity to be defeated and to win and to deal with that in a mature or not immature, because you don't necessarily want to presume adult-like behaviors on children, but it gives them an opportunity to practice, gives them an opportunity to see what it's like to suffer defeat and then to try to learn how to rebound from that and to come back, the next time having learned something from that defeat.
It was important for us when Keziah was little to get her into sports, not only just because of her disability, but because of the life skills that sports brought along with it. And it was a way that we could sneak in physiotherapy and whatnot while she would still have fun, right? When she was little, it was easier when she was preschool age because it didn't matter if she kept up to her peers as much because she didn't notice. But as she started to get older, it was harder for her to really fit into the level where her friends were at. So we had to keep her going. But now she's a rock star and she can swim. We've been doing lots of swimming lessons and having one-on-one coaching, and really to prove to the world that she could swim her own way and that it didn't have to look like a typical swimmer was important for her. I think that it's a huge form of identity, and when it's working well, you can see how proud she is in herself and how much more willing she is to work towards things. But when things are trickier, it's hard to see her because she gets discouraged in her own self-worth. And so I think that as a society and parents and even the sports coaches, that we really equip these kids to be able to accomplish what they can and enjoy sport. It's so easy to give up and get frustrated when things aren't going right. And so not only do you have to enjoy the sport that you want to be involved in, but you have to keep going. Because I would love to play hockey one day. That's a sport she really wants to try. But in order to do that, she has to learn how to skate. And you have to try all the different sports to know what they're passionate about, right? If you don't get them started at a young age, they have that much further to accomplish and more challenges, right? So the sooner she can find the sport she loves, the more practice she can give it and have success in the sport. right? And live a fit and healthy, active lifestyle.
You start to learn that regardless of the swimmer's abilities or disabilities, they're all the same. Everybody is going to have certain challenges when they're learning a new skill. Everybody's going to take their own time and follow their own path in learning how to achieve that objective of learning a new skill. And so, whether you are fully able bodied or whether you have some disabilities, there's going to be moments where you have to give that athlete an opportunity to learn at their own pace. Whether they're just learning the skill for the first time or whether they're trying to perfect it, it always takes time, and you just have to learn to accept the fact that everyone learns at their own pace, and then hopefully they will learn the skill to the best of their ability. In sport, I think sport provides them with a community outlet for exercise, but also being in a healthy environment, and it also helps them to be around other people with similar abilities. And so it creates that bond and that community involvement and that relationship with other athletes with the same abilities or similar abilities. And so they grow, and you can start to see them coming out of their shell a little bit and being more accepting of who they are, because sometimes people just see the disability and they don't get a chance to get to know the person.
Yeah, so I was always kind of enrolled in sports and or activities when I was younger, mostly able-bodied activities. And the biggest kind of the adversities would be like the challenges I faced with not being the most skilled or fastest. So I was always having to like always fight to keep up with everybody, and then like with my balance and coordination on my affected side, which was more of a struggle to work hard. It gave me incentive to work harder to compete. Working on your affected side also kind of contributes to improving your daily life, because you can do more things with you're just a bit more independent, and having that independence kind of really helps build confidence, I guess. It essentially, like, you're able to get active, you get involved, you don't feel alienated by your disability. You're fully like immersed in and interactive with all kids, and you grow up, like, for me, it's like growing up, you feel normal. You're not this kid with a disability, you're just a normal kid growing up and competing and stuff. So that's, I think sport allows you to be kind of equalized, puts every kid on like an equal stage, right? So.
The children don't participate in a lot of phys ed at school because they either can't or they're afraid to, and they get bugged, they get teased, and so they don't participate. And what I find is, once someone with a physical disability who doesn't have the confidence to go there gets some of the confidence by doing it, they then are more than willing to participate in more activities. I think there is a sense of identity for anybody that participates in sport. It doesn't matter whether they have a disability or not, that identity is them as being part of a team. And I think that sport has something that brings people closer together. I think sport needs to be, sport and recreation, not just sport, but recreation as well, needs to be in every person's life when they're young. And they can choose to participate later on in life in competitive sport or recreational sport, but they need to make sure that they're involved in activities that increases their physical literacy.
I think the involvement in sport for people with disabilities also allows them to show the world that they can do it. As children, we need to learn how to coordinate our limbs, build strong bones, build strong heart and lungs. But for kids with disabilities, it's even more so, primarily because a reduced fitness could basically exacerbate their disability. So for example, a child with cerebral palsy, it could be the difference of them being in a wheelchair or walking.
Again, it helps with self-confidence. It can help self-worth. You can provide a bit of an identity through there, become healthier, learn more about yourself. even just being stronger and more physically capable can help you out a lot in the long run, being in shape, especially when you have a disability. Like, things might not always be easy for you, but like just being more active will help a lot.
For the theoretical aspect, I decided to focus on Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. The first stage is trust versus mistrust. When young children are developing and learning, it is important to have a loving, encouraging support system to teach lessons, have them know it is okay to fail, and that someone will be with them through trials as well as successes. The second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. If an athlete is denied the opportunity to explore their fullest potential, they are at risk to doubt their abilities, which could lead to low self-esteem and feelings of shame. The third stage is initiative versus guilt. This is seen in the control that an athlete has over their world, which can be limited for people with disabilities. Initiative, a sense of ambition and responsibility, occurs when an athlete can explore their potentials with support. This leads to self-confidence and a sense of purpose. When this stage is unsuccessful, many athletes may feel guilty. The fourth stage is industry versus inferiority. Children begin to compare themselves with their peers to see how they measure up. They either develop a sense of pride or accomplishment, or they feel inferior and inadequate because they feel that they don't measure up, which in most cases is true for children with disabling conditions. The fifth stage is identity versus role confusion. As an athlete, it can be hard to pause and reflect on your role as a son or daughter, student, athlete, employee, etc. Sport is a big part of an athlete's identity and becomes a part of you. The sixth stage is intimacy versus isolation. People with disabling conditions can feel very isolated, but the Paralympic movement provides athletes with a community to feel like they belong. There's a place for everybody in sport, no matter the circumstances. The seventh stage is generativity versus stagnation. Sport comes with many ups and downs. It can become very hard to improve. Sport, in many cases, can be an athlete's life's work that is described in this stage, and as long as they are working to be the best versions of themselves throughout their journeys, the hope is that athletes feel that what they are doing means something. The last and final stage is called integrity versus despair. This stage can be summed up either feeling satisfied with sport or a sense of regret at what could have, should have, or would have been because of stereotypes and labels that are often placed on children with disabilities. Athletes go through all of these stages at every age, some at different paces than others, and for a person with a disability, these stages can seem daunting. It is important to go through them all the same, some at different paces than others, because sport is a big influencer on all of these stages, especially at a young age. It is also dependent on the circumstances of each individual person.